Well, thank you all for having us. I had a chance to chat with some of you yesterday, and I'm so happy to be back. Bit of a similar topic, or at least some overlap here. So how do we enrich our employee experience? Through policies. You know, some of this can feel very dry, but it really does impact people's day-to-day lives. So without further ado, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We're going to, unfortunately, take you all back to 2020, which was a dark time for many of us, at the start of the pandemic, and things that we collectively went through as employers and people. So around 2020, we saw some major shifts culturally, and one of those shifts was really, I think, a collective reckoning with how we think about equity, diversity, inclusion, racism, etc., in Canada, across North America, and really around the world in a lot of ways. As a result of the social pressures, the political pressures that were rising up at that time, so many employers really drafted, for maybe the first time, ED&I policies. Maybe they put together an ED&I committee. Maybe for the first time we were having some of these discussions. And now here we are, 2026, somehow, all these years later. And the question that I'm hearing, and I think you're reckoning with, is how are we incorporating these policies, these programs, these committees into the fabric of our workplace to really improve people's day-to-day experiences? So Matt has done a lot of work in this area lately, and we've got a few minutes here. Oh, the clock's not running, tech friends. So we don't know how many minutes we have. Oh, now it's running. We've got some time here that we're earmarking at the end for questions. So if you have questions as we go through the discussion, please hold on to them, make a note if you like, and then we'll have time at the end. So first question to you, how are we taking those commitments that we made as organizations these 5-6 years later and turning them into meaningful day-to-day impacts for our employees?
Yeah, it's difficult for sure. So I'll just give a little bit of history. So like you said, we were kind of reckoning with not having done a number of things back at that time. So there was probably a bit of a correction where we, moved ahead with some things that were probably long overdue. So we started anti-Black racism work. We hired a chief of diversity. We created a department with a new mandate. So we did a number of things, but one of the things I was going to talk about is when we looked at the makeup of our transit operator group. For those who don't know, the TTC, we're the public transit agency supporting public transportation in Toronto. And so we have thousands of transit operators that run our streetcars, buses, and subways throughout the city. When we looked at the representation numbers for that role, we found that it was under 20% representation for women in those roles, which, typically we'd hired people with commercial driving experience, so that could be expected to a certain extent in a male-dominated kind of line of work. But, as our CEO described it at the time, it was statistically impossible to have that few number of women in transit operator roles. So we were given a mandate to hire 40% women into transit operator roles. So this was a good first step. I would call it like an overcorrection. But what we found was, it seemed, at least anecdotally, we were not strong on the data front, that people were leaving as quickly as they were coming. So we're doing a great job getting people through the door, but we weren't getting them to stay. And we're trying to reckon with, and that's kind of what we've been working with since then. What's going on? How is this happening?
Yep.
Some of the things that we've looked at is, I think we changed the criteria to hire. I mentioned commercial driving experience. We kind of focus more on customer service. This is a good thing. It opens the pool of people to be hired, but then we didn't kind of adjust what we do to account for people not coming in with that experience, which is still important for driving huge vehicles on very busy streets. So we took the first step of just talking to the women that we hire about what their experience was, what was going well, what was going wrong, where were the gaps. We created a peer mentorship or a peer buddy program for new hires for women into transit operator roles, so they could go to people with their questions that they might not be comfortable talking to their management or their colleagues about. And that through that process, we found that there was a lot more comfort in the work environment because we were making it more inviting for people. We also have started tracking and have a better understanding of why people stick around or exit in the training and why they stick around or exit in the first year of employment. And we've tried to diagnose what some of those issues are. Where are the gaps? Could be things like leave or didn't understand or have expectations of the seniority that goes with the scheduling and things like that. So we've done a lot more work to inform people up front about what the job is going to be and how difficult it can be depending on kind of like what your lifestyle is. It's not something that we're proud to talk about, but it's important. But we're a 100-year-old company, so a lot of our facilities do not have women's washrooms. So there's been a conscious effort to build those facilities. It's kind of there's no clearer way to tell people they're not welcome when we don't even have a bathroom for them. So that's things like that. We didn't really think like how important of a message we were sending to people.
Well, so when we were preparing for this discussion, Matt said this to me, and I said, yeah, same. I used to work at another large quasi-public organization that had buildings that were over 100 years old, and we couldn't figure out why we were having so much trouble attracting and retaining women, didn't have bathrooms for them, and then if we could somehow get over that hurdle, didn't have uniforms that fit them. It's these really basic sort of components of your work life, your day-to-day existence in the workplace that signals to someone, are you welcome here? Is there space for you here? Quite literally, is there space for you here?
Yeah, further to what you're saying too, I think I've talked about pants a lot more than I thought I would ever talk about pants in my career, but I've seen samples, I've seen people try them on, I've seen them come up to people's waist like this. So I think that's a really important part of making sure people feel comfortable and included in the workplace.
Yep, absolutely.
A couple other things, we have prioritized adding parental leave top-up to our non-union benefits program. We're long overdue on that, and we're not competing with the public sector. So again, trying to tell people we're serious about bringing in, people who predominantly often take more of the parental responsibilities without that benefit was tough. And we've recently hired as our chief of transportation a woman, and we have multiple department heads who are women in the department as well. So I think we've done quite a bit to change the culture and to kind of go beyond just bringing people through the door.
Yeah.
So I think if there's takeaways for me, what we've learned over the years, just, you have to think about all those, even the small things maybe in the journey that the employee faces that maybe, have that impact that we don't necessarily intuitively think of, and they may not be HR things, they may be day-to-day operations things, they may be infrastructure things. There's so many reasons why, we might inadvertently be sending the wrong message to our new recruits.
Yeah. Remember that book, Soup for the Soul? It was like teenage chicken soup, teenage soul, mother soul, everybody got one. Well, one of the messages was don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
And I often find myself telling my clients, sometimes you have to sweat the small stuff. Because it's that small stuff that's going to tell people every day, I value you, I see you, I know what your needs are, and I'm willing to work with you to meet those needs. You can't ignore those details when they're so influential on how somebody feels in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think, to take it to the topic, where you go from a program or a communication strategy or, whatever, and you bring it into policy or you bring it into the lived experience of employees. So.
Yep, absolutely. So how, in your experience, does this work? And I think we're starting to dance around it. Feed into retention and meeting employees' expectations.
Yeah, I think that the first step to really be able to do that is you have to understand who your population is. And so I think that, I just told you a bunch of things that we learned retrospectively, but we didn't really understand up front. So what we've tried to do in our current employee engagement survey is we made a real effort to include demographic and, age, gender, race, that kind of information, so that not at an individual level, but at an aggregate level, so we can have a better understanding of what does this workforce look like. And from there, we're hoping that, as we better understand what our what the experience is, or what the makeup of our workforce is, we can understand how the experience differs based on different elements, and it could be not just personal characteristics, but also where in the organization people work.
And I've seen some surveys like that include factors like caregiving responsibilities. And are those caregiving responsibilities parent to child, or are they adult child to senior parent? That kind of information can be really helpful in understanding what your workforce needs. And as our workforce ages, how does that influence our collective needs?
Yeah, and it also opens the door to the discussion where, if multiple people are saying it, it's not something that we can just say is not important or that we weren't aware of, right? So opening that door even to just listen to people to tell us that that's important was important for us. So that's why we thought it was important. And I think we did have a caregiving kind of question on our survey as well. But our goal, not to say in lieu of people management or leadership or any of those things, but was to bring a more data-focused, data-focused aspect to the work. So what we were hoping to do is first understand the makeup. We're currently working through developing a report to share back with our employees about our demographic makeups. You gave us the information, we're being transparent and sharing it back. That should include some insights about where we're doing well, where we can improve. By and large, we were happy to see that overall we're very representative of the city that we serve, so we're pretty happy with that aspect of it. But ideally, the more information we can get about our workforce, the more we can understand them and respond to their needs. So, and this is aspirational, but in a perfect world, I was thinking about one of the presenters yesterday talked about having the data and the technology to be able to almost say, I don't need your resume because I know everything I need to know about you at that level from data. So, to the extent that we can better understand our people that way, and again, I don't mean in lieu of, I don't think she meant in that scenario, and then we don't interview people, right? There's still the human aspect, but how much can we learn from the data that we can collect? And then to me, the other part is there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. In our organization, we have a lot of frontline employees, we have engineers, we have back office people. So there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. An operator probably needs something different than an IT executive versus a janitor versus whoever else. We have a number of different employees, and there's not going to be one solution across the multiple cultures. So all that to say, when you look at how an organization analyzes its customers, that's a very important set of metrics. And I know for us in our public reporting, we have pages and pages of customer metrics.
Right.
We don't really have any employee metrics.
Right.
So how do we get some of those employee metrics to help us understand what the customer, our employees who are shopping for other jobs and deciding if they want to continue to shop with us and be retained, how do we understand that customer, what they're looking for, and how we're getting it right and where we're not getting it right? So, to the extent that that can be done, I think it's probably closer than it seems based on how technology is evolving, obviously AI. What are those tools out there that we can leverage? And so that's what I'm interested in doing. But overall, taking it back to what we can do today, because like I said, that's aspirational. It's thinking consciously about, it overlaps some with the first question, what we talked about. What are those small things and how do they differ based on our different employees? And then how do we develop, active ways that we can continue to listen and converse with people to understand and make sure we're getting it right?
Yeah. So sometimes when we're doing this work, we're so busy, we've got our heads down, focusing on the productivity and our own, likely managerial responsibilities and budgets and everything else. And I think for practitioners in this area, sometimes you're so busy doing the work and you're not necessarily demonstrating to the organization or showing the organization all of the benefits of this work, all of the ways in which you're doing this work. So one of the questions that I'm often thinking about is, okay, well, it's important that the substantive stuff happens, but it's also equally important sometimes that our workforce and our employee population knows that we're doing it and can see that after we do a survey, we're taking the results of those surveys and we're implementing them in a meaningful way that will impact them. So how do we penetrate the organization, particularly where, I mean, you've got 2 employees on your staff for a workforce of 18,000 people.
Yeah, 50% are right there.
There's one of them over there. Good job. So how do you, what's your megaphone, right? How do you take that work and amplify it across the organization so that folks know that their voices are being heard and that things are changing?
Yeah, that's a really critical part, and I think, like, for context for us, for a number of reasons, none of which are good, but it had been 10 years since we had done an employee engagement survey last year.
Wow.
So we're long overdue. The stakes are now high now that we finally asked that we do show that we're delivering for employees. We worked very hard with our unions and with our communications folks to get a high response rate, and we were able to get 67% of people to participate. So we're very happy with that. But now that brings a certain pressure to deliver and show people that we are taking it seriously.
Yep.
So we've done a few things, and we've kind of hit every level of the organization in different ways. So the first thing we did is brought our executive team together, and we had them agree on some core commitments for the year for the organization. 8 core commitments. Our survey provider Ipsos did the analysis, gave us some key areas of like key themes to look at, and the commitments aligned to those themes. We then developed an employee engagement task force of senior leaders in the organization. These leaders were intended to be champions of the program, but again, as you mentioned, 2-person team also to help us do the work, roll up their sleeves and actually help us. So getting them involved, put some ownership back out into the organization, has champions out there. And we all know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir in this room, HR is not going to be the one who changes employee experience. It's going to be managers and leaders who change employee experience, right? So there's a number of different reasons it made a lot of sense for us to take that approach. We've got a lot of passionate people on this task force, excitement, skill sets that maybe not necessarily their wheelhouse, but you know, we're getting moving on it, and we're getting the information out there. And then the last part is the next phase, which is we need to loop back with our frontline employees. So we wanted to start with a kind of a leadership task force because you know, we can go to employees at the front line and ask them how we can do better, how we can improve, but they're not decision makers. So we wanted to have a set of senior leaders who can take the feedback from what we hear and be able to run with that feedback and be accountable for it. And this way that we do have the front line also engaged in owning the solutions, but they're doing it in a way that is aligned to what their level of influence is. We're giving them the platform, but we're not asking them to solve the problems that we should really be working to solve. So that's kind of like what we've done in the last year in terms of getting that moving. We have quite a few initiatives underway under all of the pillars. We have a centralized reporting where we're tracking that, and we're just about to report out to the organization on our progress to make sure that we keep the transparency going. We also shared our full survey results, not every single question, but we were very, very transparent with our employees. So it's saying, like, you know everything we know. So we're trying to find different opportunities to build that trust, to show people that we do want to hear their feedback, that they're safe to share that feedback, and that we will take it seriously. And we, again, try to practice what we preach and find a way for people to see us walking.
And in my experience, you know, as you're talking, I'm hearing like there are so many passionate people. And in my experience, I've been in workplaces where we have employee resource groups or affinity organizations or really engaged unions. And sometimes those folks make some of your most powerful partners in communicating about the work, in driving the work forward, in driving accountability. And sometimes it's accountability that you don't necessarily enjoy. Like the person is calling you and saying, hey, can't help but notice, haven't heard from you in a while. But, you know, that's really important when we've got full plates to have people who are going to follow up and push a little bit to see that progress.
I forgot to mention, too, you mentioned the union, and I'll just keep it brief, but they were a key partner as well. I think our previous survey efforts, we did kind of despite the union. This time we brought them to the table early and got their buy-in on our approach, and continue to get their feedback, and we continue to meet with them to talk to them about the progress.
And in my experience, when you're asking employees in partnership with their representatives to engage in something, the likelihood of buy-in and those final numbers, 67%, numbers like that, you're more likely to get where you've got that union participation.
Absolutely.
Good. All right, last question from me, and then I'm coming to you. So if you're not ready, get ready. Next steps. What is on your policy wish list? And talk to me about like short term, medium term, long term. Where's your blue sky?
Yeah, I think that in general, it's not a specific policy, but I think we need to just be thinking about employee experience as part of policy work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times policy, and you mentioned being it's dry, boring, it's the risk protection framework, it's how we make decisions, right? But a lot of those frameworks and those policies really do influence how people work and what their experience is like. So if I'm a leader and I'm supposed to be in charge of a team of 20 people, but I can't make basic decisions because of a policy, that's going to harm my employee experience, it's going to harm their employee experience. I don't think most people look at policies or procedures as employee experience things, but when we think about what annoys us about our job, it's when we can't sign into our computer, or when that form takes way too long to figure out, or that I have to call 12 people to reset whatever, right? So it's all those little things, again, we talk about little things that add up. It's rarely somebody goes out on LinkedIn and says, how do I get $2,000 more in my salary? It's all those little things that kind of add up where people don't feel valued or trusted to make decisions about their work. So to me, that's one part of what I'd like to see us do. I think we also need to look at our policies to ensure, as we think about employee experience, and again, developing people from different demographics, making sure we do have an inclusive workplace that is well represented. We have to find that balance, and I think somebody earlier was talking about transparency and explaining why and how we're making these decisions, but finding opportunities to balance in a large public sector organization that has a lot of public scrutiny, making fair and equitable hiring decisions with providing opportunities for people to learn and develop, not just from an EDI perspective, but also from a retention perspective as well. And then the last thing is, I think that both from a financial sustainability perspective, but also from a providing a good employee experience perspective, what kind of benefits or what kind of leaves, what kind of other employee offerings can we look at to make sure that, again, that when I mentioned all the different employee groups and subcultures and things like that we have in the organization, that we do have a competitive offering for people from all different backgrounds and across all different roles. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if we have a mic going around or if people are just, yes, we do. Okay, very good. If you have a question, please raise a hand and we will get a mic to you. I would also be interested in hearing if anyone has really nice success stories around how they have incorporated ED&I policies into their organization and seen the way that it's impacting people positively on a day-to-day basis. If people have, I used to call them woot-woots on my team, where you would say something that you had done and you were really proud of yourself for, and then everyone would clap. So if anyone has a woot-woot, please go ahead and we will clap for you. Questions or comments? Oh, we've got one.
So first off, thank you for the presentation, especially because it's great to see our government entities, broader public sector services that are doing this work. I come from the Anti-Racism Directorate of the Province of Ontario, so we were doing a work in tandem with you, and so kudos and congratulations, because it's still happening, which is probably most important. I'm currently with OCAD University, so hello everybody, Carrie Ann Douglas Powell. My woot-woot actually is for OCAD, is that during actually just before the pandemic, is that we implemented things called cluster hires. So we did a batch hiring of Indigenous employees, we did batch hiring of Black employees, we did a batch hiring, another batch hiring of Indigenous employees. And so our woot-woot is the fact we were able to go out and to challenge norms of what a traditional faculty member looks like in art and design and in science and in post-secondary education. Where I will talk about the not so woot-woot is the employee experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, as much as we brought them in, I think you had probably the same experience. As quickly as they came in, we built a community, paid a lot of attention and time with them to build that community,
Yeah.
but they also left or are leaving or are dissatisfied because we're not doing enough to keep that enabled. So as much as we bring these programs, my thing to everybody in here is like, it's great to make sure the pants fit. It is great to make sure that we are bringing people in, but we need to remember, like, how do we keep them and how do we make them stay? And so continuing those surveys, I think, is super important, and it's something we don't do enough of. But no, that was my challenge, and my congratulations. I think I should probably ask questions.
Now we all clap for the woot-woot. That's part of the process.
So my question then is probably now, because I'm pretty sure you are probably faced with the same things that I'm faced with, it being in broader public sector services, the boards are starting to ask questions. Are we not done this already? Hasn't the time passed? Haven't we brought enough people? You know, why do we still have special programs? And so my question to you is, are you facing that? And what are your responses to your board members when they're asking you those questions?
Yeah. Oh, can I just jump in?
Please.
First? I know she was making
That'll
more
give me
eye
time to
contact
think about
with
my
you.
answer.
You know, we've probably all heard the expression that culture eats policy for lunch. You can have the policies where you're doing the batch hiring and you're changing what it looks like to be an educator and you're doing this really important work. But if the culture of the workplace does not embrace new Indigenous professors, new racialized professors, then those folks are going to come in and they're going to be subject to all kinds of nonsense and they are not going to stay. And you may even have larger organizational issues, you know, not staying is one thing, but these things can get really messy really quickly. So I think we have to be, unfortunately, you know, building the plane as we fly it. We're working on the culture, we're working on the policies, we're checking in with people, we're doing that active listening, and it's all gonna kind of happen at once. Yeah, but sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, that's fine. No, so I think like what we do get questions. I think in general there is still a pretty good buy-in though. We do have a multi-year anti-Black racism strategy. We do have a number of different diversity initiatives in place that are well established and are being reported against. We have annual reporting to the city that we're required to do. So it's kind of a well-established thing at this point. But I think something that we try to do is think about ways that we can report the return on investment of these kinds of programs. I mean, obviously it's the right thing to do, and we are one of the most diverse cities in the world, so it's incumbent on us to continue to make sure that we represent everybody in that city. Again, that in and of itself is not necessarily always going to change certain people's minds.
Yeah.
But there's also, you know, when we look at talent, we look at our ability to recruit for key roles, our ability to be mobile and be attractive to all different types of people is what's going to make us competitive in the environment. It's why a lot of these programs are important, and we're finding, you know, talent in those unconventional places does add value. So I think that's one way that we continue to keep that work moving.
Yeah, I always thought of it too when I was talking to my board as really there are three different ways to convince people, right? There's the moral imperative, which, you know, probably everybody in here understands. It's the right thing to do. There's the legal imperative, which, you know, as a lawyer, I won't have to tell you, but we got to do this stuff. We can't be discriminating, and we can't be upholding systemic barriers to equity. And then there's the business imperative. And this is where I think that it can be powerful to talk to a board or your executive about that business imperative. And increasingly over the last 5 years, we've seen more and more research, you know, from the KPMGs of the world who are telling us that it is better for our bottom line if our teams are diverse in terms of education, background, makeup, all of these things. We are more robust, we are more resilient, we are more creative, we are more financially successful. So trying to adapt and adopt some of that language so that when we're talking to our board or we're talking to our bosses or we're talking to our shareholders, we are talking in the same sort of paradigm that they are. And that's where I think having data is also critically important, because often I would have people say, well, haven't we done enough? And it's like, then I want to pull up a big long chart out of my trench coat and say, actually, the data shows that we're still significantly underrepresented in terms of people with disabilities. So I think having that data, having that language, being able to understand the financial implications, as cold as it may feel, because we all buy into the moral imperative, it is also a necessary way to win over parties who may not already be on side.
Yep.
Other questions? We don't have much time left, but
Back there.
Oh, do we have another one? I hope there's a woot woot.
I've got sort of two questions. One is, I'm curious to know, where are you on the 40% journey? And then two, do you have to always sort of explain, well, 40% for women, but what about, are you getting lots of questions of, you hit that 40%, and what about A, B, and C, and D kind of thing?
Yeah, I think we do get those questions. So on the 40%, first of all, I don't know the actual exact percentage that we're at. In terms of hiring, we are hitting the 40% consistently and have been for years. Obviously, when you have like a large employee body where you don't have a lot of turnover, it's going to take a while to change the makeup of that. So I think we're still probably overall lower than we should be, but we're making tangible progress. We do get questioned in other areas, but this is where I think what you just said about data is helpful. Our demographic information that we got from our survey showed actually that their demographic makeup other than women is actually pretty reflective of the city. We're probably a little bit underreported on Aboriginal employees and people who represent having a disability. But overall, I think the data bears out actually that we are putting the work into the right areas and targeting the right demographic at this time, and that we're doing all right on the rest. And again, based on tangible data.
And one of the things we talked about in our prep too is looking at if you have that kind of snapshot demographic data, it can also be really helpful to have longitudinal data. So, okay, we hire 40% of our new employees are women. Well, 5 years from now, where are those folks? How many of them have been promoted? And how does that number compare to men who have a similar skill set? How about our folks with disabilities? How many of those people are making it into managerial or executive roles? And how does that compare? So really trying to leverage that data to tell you as much as it can. And one of the things that we talk about is like, we've got a leaky pipeline, right? That's familiar language to many folks in this room. Well, where are the leaks? Is it at the point of promotion? Are we losing folks to competitors? And do we need to make our retention efforts stronger? What are the holes in the system? And then you can start having conversations cross-functionally about filling those holes. Also, the timer has turned red to indicate that we are over time. Any closing thoughts, remarks?
No, I think just that, it's not easy, but I think the first step is just making sure you're taking the time to think about what the experience is, doing the little things right, and just not losing sight of that.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you all so much.